If you are serious about a career in user experience design or user interface design, then you're gonna wanna watch this video because I'm answering all of your questions all the way from when's a good time to start applying for UX roles and will AI replace UX designers? Let's get into it. Just a quick intro on me. Who am I? How am I qualified to talk to you about UX today? If you are unfamiliar, I am Ashley Janelle, UX UI designer. I've been a UX UI designer for about the last 7 years. I've worked everywhere from startups to large size companies, mid-sized companies, big tech companies. I'm also a UX coach. I have a UX course, Learn UX in 16 weeks. And I have been coaching for the last 5 years and running my course for about the last 5 years. So all of the questions that aspiring UX designers ask all the way to more senior UX designers. So pretty much any question that you have, whether you are an aspiring UX designer all the way to someone who maybe is currently a UX designer and wants to level up in their field, we will have conversations about right here on this channel or my TikTok, wherever. So today, like I mentioned, I'm gonna be answering all of your questions that I asked you guys to submit over on all of my other social channels. So I'm gonna be answering all of those questions. I am also going to be cooking. Now I know that if you are here for the UX, you did not sign up for a cooking video. This is not a cook with me video. I am just simultaneously making dinner. So let's get into it. Okay, so if you guys are new here, I want to preface this video by saying I did a 4-part series on UX, everything from how to land a job, portfolios, interviews, what hiring managers are looking for, salaries, how to find a salary for a UX designer in your area. Go and check out the playlist that I already have on my channel, UX design or UX, the UX playlist. And there are 4 videos where I went in depth on all of that stuff. So this is kind of a continuation of that, but just FYI if you have not seen those videos. So the first question that I'm answering is, how do I stay up to date on the latest UX UI trends? And I think that this is really important because obviously as UX designers, it is our job to know what the latest trends are. It's our job to obviously know what the latest trends are to be able to design those and implement those into our designs. But it's also important to just make sure that we're always on the cusp of what's changing in the industry. Obviously, we're going to talk about AI. AI is something that is here. But, you know, how does that affect, our jobs and things like that? Or does it affect us? We need to know these things. So honestly, what I always recommend is for you to have a very proactive way of keeping up with trends and a very passive way of keeping up with trends. So what does that mean? Let's start with the passive way of keeping up with trends, because that's kind of my favorite. So one passive way of keeping up with trends that I really like is to make sure that whatever it is that I'm doing, wherever I'm spending a lot of time, so thinking about places that you spend a lot of time. So I open my Instagram app, my Twitter app several times a day. So if you are someone who is wanting to stay up on trends, why don't you follow some of those UX UI pages or UX UI hashtags, UX portfolio hashtags on Twitter, on Instagram? Because now those posts will now become part of your feed and they will become part of what it is that you see when you open up your feed. So that's one way to just be very passive about it. I like those pages because obviously they're going to just pop right up on my feed, but also because there's so many designers out there. And I think that it's really important for us to just make sure that we're always staying abreast of what other people are doing, what other people are designing, how other people are solving problems. So now let's kind of talk about some of the more proactive ways. One of the things that honestly will just happen once you enter this field of UX design is that you will never look at any kind of interface or experience the same again. So what do I mean by that? When I look at a new feature that an application has rolled out, or maybe there's not necessarily a new feature, but maybe there's something that's changed within the application, I am not looking at that from the perspective of someone who's just an everyday user. I am naturally going to look at that from the perspective of a UX designer, someone who is obviously going to be asking questions and wanting to understand, okay, why was this choice made? So I think it's really important for the applications and the websites that you do frequently, daily, that you start to become not just a user of those applications and those websites, but you also start to look at the overall experience and design in a way that almost critiques it, but it's like, okay, so they added this, so why was that? How do I feel about that? Do I feel like there was a better way that this could have been done? Or was this pretty much the best way that they could have done this? Another way is to really be proactive about design conferences and meetups and design groups. You can find a lot of these on sites like LinkedIn, meetup.com. I know I've talked about that a lot before, but really just making sure that you continue to make sure that part of what it is that you do throughout your week and your day is spending time immersing yourself in the community. I can't tell you guys how powerful it is and how honestly life-changing it is to have a group of people, or at least one other person, to really go on this UX journey with. It doesn't matter if you're already a UX designer or you are an aspiring UX designer. You always need resources. So making sure that you are always finding out, when are these conferences, when are these meetups happening, what are some of the other opportunities that I can be a part of to make sure that I am constantly learning and I'm growing and that I'm pushing myself beyond what my current abilities are, or what my current knowledge is. Another really great way to be observant. I know it's kind of interesting when people say like, be observant to, trends that are happening, but I think we're observant a lot of times and we don't really know it. So think about when different OSs change. So if we're talking Apple, for example, they usually come out with a new iOS every year. And typically that iOS is going to have something in it that you're going to see repeated in other industries. Maybe other industries have started to implement whatever that particular component is, or treatment or practice or whatever. And now Apple's doing it. But it's nice to see. I like when Apple does it because it's annually, and so we can actually have something to compare it with. So I can compare the current OS with the new OS that is coming out, or the new iOS, or what have you. So that's another really great way to kind of take a deep dive instead of just looking at it from a consumer perspective and just using the product, actually see why they're, making these changes, where some of these other changes already existing, in other applications or other platforms or what have you. So just again, remembering to always not approach every experience as a consumer and more so from the designer side or the UX side. Now, that's not to take away from your enjoyment of these applications, but again, over time, you will just become more aware. So the next question is a really good one, and actually I'm still going to refer you over to my playlist that I already put together of videos that I did last month on UX design specifically. But the question of how do I get started? I don't know where to start. This is a really good one, and there's one specific thing that I want to hit on. So I always ask the question, how do you learn best, and what is your timeline? We'll start with how do I learn best. How do I learn best is really important, because how do I learn best is going to determine whether or not you should take a boot camp, or whether you should go the self-taught route, or whether you should maybe do kind of some of those smaller courses that aren't necessarily a boot camp, but they're not necessarily you learning on your own. So that's really important. Ask yourself those questions. how do I learn best? Do I need an instructor? Is that something that I feel like I need? Someone to course correct me, someone to tell me when I'm going in a direction that isn't the best direction? That is going to be really important. If you are someone who needs direction, I was someone who needed direction. I took a boot camp. I am a believer of a boot camp. That's why I started a boot camp. Then, a boot camp or something like that is really going to be what you specifically are going to need in order to succeed. If you are someone who doesn't feel like you need as much direction, or not that you don't need as much direction, but you don't necessarily want as much direction, you kind of want to take this journey on your own, then maybe the self-taught route is going to be, the route for you. So really thinking about how you learn best, we're all different, is really going to determine, how do you get started. Another thing that you really want to think about is, what is your timeline? We talked about this before in other videos, but if your timeline, if you say that I want to become a UX designer in the next 4 months, then, maybe learning on your own, having to source the information yourself, then learn the material, things like that may not necessarily be the route for you. That's where maybe something like a boot camp might come in and be really helpful for you. But if you're somebody who says, you know what, I actually really don't have a timeline, I can, maybe work my job or, continue to do what I'm doing and then, kind of do this on the side, a couple times a week, then I would say that the self-taught route is definitely going to be more of the route for you. So really trying to figure out how you learn best and what your timeline is really is going to determine that question that you asked of, how do I get started? Because once you have determined what your timeline is and how you learn best, your options kind of really open up to you and your path becomes really, really clear. Again, I would refer you guys to that video that I did on UX boot camps, and I'll link it, UX boot camps versus like a master's degree or the self-taught route, and really trying to determine which one is best for you. I'll link that video, but remember those 2 questions as you're asking yourself, how do I get started? And you're kind of racking your brain. Honestly, the information is really out there for you. There's no sense in kind of spinning your wheels on getting started. The paths are pretty clear, depending on, which route you take. I think honestly, the biggest thing is going to be you deciding that you are going to commit to this thing, whether that's going to be a course or whether that's going to be the self-taught route, and going for it full force, being committed, those types of things. And honestly, a course or a self-taught route is not going to give you you have to have that discipline and that structure before you go either route. So that's the other thing that I also would say is make sure that you are mentally ready to take on a challenge like switching careers, learning a new skill, or learning new skills before you actually, go out and do it and say, okay, I want to commit to learning on my own. I want to commit to a course. Make sure that you have already mentally committed, because that's going to honestly be half the battle. And again, we talk about that in that video that I have just linked for you guys. So the next question is a really great one, and it is, when is it a really good time for me to start applying for jobs? I will say that I don't think that this person meant time of the year, because I will say that I don't really think that there's a time of the year that you should start, really applying for jobs. If companies are hiring and they have the job rec out, then I think it's a good time for you to apply. I think what this person meant was, how do I know that I'm ready to start applying for jobs? I've talked about this a little bit before, but your portfolio is your bread and butter when it comes to getting a job. So you want to make sure that your portfolio is in the space where it has been looked over by a mentor or a coach, someone, we've talked about that before, the importance of having a mentor or a coach, is someone who can not only help you as you are on this journey to becoming a UX designer, but also someone who can take a look at your work and say, hey, you're missing this in your portfolio, or it would be good for you to hit on this, or it would be good for you to talk about this, or it would be good for you to have a project that, maybe looks like this. That is when all of those boxes are checked off and you feel good about what it is that you have, then I would say that it's a good time for you to start applying for jobs. Obviously, your portfolio isn't the only thing that you need. You need your resume and portfolio, resume. That's about it. Make sure that your LinkedIn is up to date, things like that. But assuming all those other things are done, that's when I would say when your portfolio has been signed off by someone, a mentor, coach, what have you, that is when it is a good time to start applying for jobs. I mentioned this before, but you know, obviously I have students that are my students that go through my course with me. So I am their mentor, I am their coach, those sorts of things. So they don't necessarily have to worry about finding someone. But I've also shared with you guys that a while ago I was doing portfolio audits for people who weren't my students, just people who I wanted to help. And one of the biggest things that I noticed was that when I would take a look at their portfolios, there would be a lot of information missing. And I've gone into detail about this before, but just kind of a little overview. You know, when you're talking about your portfolio, or when you're talking about your projects in your portfolio, you want to make sure that you are talking about the process that you worked through. So making sure that you start with the research and make sure that you start with, you know, what the problem was that you were trying to solve, and not just jumping from this was the problem that I was trying to solve and this is, you know, my beautiful high fidelity, you know, mock. You know, that's not at all what hiring managers or design teams want to see from someone that they are potentially bringing on as a new team member. What they want to see is somebody who can solve problems. So in a lot of these portfolios that I was auditing, I was seeing a trend, and that trend was that students, aspiring UX designers would talk about the problem that they were trying to solve, and then they would kind of throw in a little bit about the research, a little bit about maybe the strategy, maybe there was, you know, some user quotes, and then they just kind of jumped right into their high fidelity mock, or maybe some sketches and then their mock. When it's like, you know, I always give the analogy of when we used to be in school and we were in math class, you didn't get points for the correct answer. You may have gotten like 1 point or 2 points. Where you really got the credit was for showing your work. And remember when you had those long math problems and those long science projects or those long science problems, the teacher wanted to see the work, because that was going to tell them or dictate your understanding, your level of understanding of the problem that you were trying to solve and the methods that you use to actually solve the problem. And then from there, they could help you, because even if you got the answer wrong, but you were kind of right in your work, then they could help you and there could be a discussion about, you know, how you can improve and what you could have done better. That's essentially UX in a nutshell. Like, that's what your portfolio should show. It should have a high emphasis on the work that you did. So yeah, obviously you want to show, you know, your high fidelity mocks, but you know, the emphasis should really be on, you know, what did those users say when you were talking to them? What were some of those things that you were looking for when you were doing user research? Why did you think that user research was important? What were some of the strategy methods that you thought were really good for this particular project? Why did you choose to go with those? You know, what was the user feedback? How did that inform the strategy? How did that strategy inform the design? Like, there's so much that has to be shown in these portfolios, and it's never enough to, you know, just show the final project or the final mock-up or, you know, high fidelity wireframes, which is seemingly what a lot of people want to jump to, but that is not what gets you the job. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are. It does not matter unless you are a user interface designer and you are focusing on the branding and the look and design principles and things like that. And even still, you have to have a detailed approach and a detailed portfolio that shows how you even came up with that. So your portfolio has to be pretty detailed is what I'm getting at. So that's how you know you're ready to apply for the job, is when your portfolio is ready. And I would say, honestly, you are better off, and I say this all the time, you are better off not applying to that job you want or to that company and waiting until you can, make sure that everything is good than trying to apply and having a team or a hiring manager go through your portfolio when it's not in the best place. That's what you don't want, because now you've just applied to this company, they've seen your work before, and they know what your portfolio looks like, and you may want to apply again, but because you didn't do your due diligence on the front end, make sure that you had everything that you needed, things like that, now they've kind of already seen your portfolio. And they may see it again and say, wait, I saw this person already. I, don't want to go through this again. So it's always best to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward early, and making sure that, you can't be too, and this is with anything, like you can't be too anxious, that you let your anxiety or your, that you allow yourself to get in a position where you're just applying and you haven't, taken care of what you need to take care of on the back end, i.e. making sure that your portfolio is where it needs to be, having a mentor look over it, things like that. So yeah, that's what I would say is, when you know that you are ready to start applying for jobs. Very, very important. Obviously a very, very big step, but you want to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward. So that's how I would say that when you are ready to apply for jobs. So the next question is a really good one, and it is, how do I know that I have the right projects in my portfolio? This is important. So the biggest reason that this is important, and you can probably guess if you haven't already, but this is important because what you have in your portfolio is going to demonstrate your level of ability. It is what is going to either get you in the door or not get you in the door. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of the types of projects that you should have in your portfolio. But I will say first, before I say that the most important projects in your portfolio are going to be the ones that are solving current problems that industries are facing. So what do I mean by that? This kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier when we were talking about design trends and how to stay abreast on different design trends. So one example that I'll give is, I think that maps are going to become a lot more interactive. They're going to become a lot more personable. I think that the way that we think about maps, like a map application on our phone, is going to be very different than what it will look like in, let's say, 5 years. I think that the way that maps work today are good. I think that for the most part, they typically tend to get us from point A to point B. But I still think that there are some pain points when we use maps. One person could say, I'm standing in one place and I'm looking at a map and I'm not really sure which way it's telling me to go. Let's say that you're in a new city and you don't know what street is to the left of you and what street is to the right of you. And a lot of times we find ourselves just starting to walk and seeing if the GPS, corrects us, or if it looks like, our little bubble is moving along in the correct direction. And that is how we determine how do we get to the next, point from point A to point B, or if we're going in the right direction. I think that is going to be changing. I think that that's a huge pain point for a lot of users. And I think that is going to be changing the way that maps will function, the way that maps will look, the way that maps will operate. So knowing that, if I were a new or aspiring UX designer wanting to get into the field, wanting to build my portfolio, I might look into that. I might look into, hey, what are some of the pain points that people are having with this application that we use every day almost? And then, doing a research study around that and just seeing if there's any validity to it. I think there's validity to it, but obviously we have to go out and we have to, prove our hypothesis and things like that. So that's just one example of an industry problem that hiring managers are looking for people to solve. Now, you may say, well, I'm not going to join a company that, is designing maps. That's not the point. The point is that hiring managers and design teams want to know that you are thinking about things that are currently happening in the industry, that you have a pulse on what is going on, what is important, where people are having pain points, where the industry is kind of trending and going. That's why these problems are important. So for example, in my course, I make sure that all of my projects that are given to students are problems. All of them are problems that are needed to be solved in the industry today. But if you're someone who is in maybe another course, or maybe you're in another boot camp, or maybe you're self-taught, those are the kinds of problems that I would be looking for. Those are the kind of problems that I would be trying to direct myself to. Now, that's not to say that you have to think of every industry problem that's going on right now. Some of your projects, it's fine to just be things like, e-com. That's another really good project to have in your portfolio. A lot of, I think some really strong portfolio pieces come out of e-commerce. How are we thinking about e-commerce? E-commerce is actually another one that is really going to be changing, I think, this year, over the next several years. The way that we shop is becoming a lot different than it looked 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. How will things like AI and virtual reality, how will that play into e-com and the way that we shop and the way that we are able to maybe try things on or see things in our home? Like, all of these things are things that you want to be thinking about when you are thinking about, okay, what are these projects that are going into my portfolio? Or are these projects that I'm getting from my course, are these good projects that I feel like have meat and substance and projects that I want to get excited about? So I would really think about those kinds of things as you're thinking about the projects. So again, e-com is a really good one. Even just showing, how you can improve maybe a checkout process. How can you make it more efficient? How can you make it more safe? How can you make it more user-friendly? That's a really good one. Another really great project is going to be something that you are passionate about. So let's say you're passionate about nonprofits. Nonprofits is going to be something that you're going to want to make sure that you have in your portfolio. Maybe you are working with a nonprofit and you're doing pro bono work, or maybe you have kind of made up a nonprofit and there's a specific problem that you're looking to solve within the application of that nonprofit. You want to make sure that you have projects that you are passionate about. Maybe there's a problem that you really want to solve that you haven't seen anyone solve yet. That can be a passion project. Passion projects are really important because all of that passion, not only will it shine through in your interviews and you will come off excited and bubbly about what it is that you're talking about, which is very important in selling yourself, which I also talk about in some of those other UX videos that I did. But also, when you're excited about a project and it is a passion of yours, you are going to work that much harder at it. Obviously, when you get to a job, we hope that the work that we are doing is meaningful to us. We hope that we really like it and it's very engaging and that there's depth to it. So, but sometimes there's not, right? Sometimes it's like, maybe not the thing that you're most passionate about. But when we have the opportunities to do these projects on our own and to build our portfolio, that's the time to really have fun. And like I said, that will shine through in your interviews and when you're talking to your hiring managers and when you're explaining your process and things like that. All of that is going to shine through. So it is very, very important to make sure that you pick good projects, industry problems that are currently happening, and problems that are passions of yours. So the last question that I'm going to answer is a very hot topic, and I'm just going to get into it. I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off, and that is AI. And will AI take over our jobs? Are UX designers safe? I'm interested in getting into UX, but I don't know how AI is going to affect it. I will say this. I have a lot of opinions and thoughts about AI, and what I will say is that, number one, AI is going to affect every single industry. There is not an industry that is not going to be affected by AI. Not the healthcare industry, not nurses, not doctors, not teachers, not government workers, not people in design, not people in sales, not people who work in grocery stores. There is no one who is going to be unaffected by AI. We already have robots. We already have all of these different automated mechanisms that take places in places like warehouses and hospitals and different places like that. But for some reason, AI, this thing that is kind of at its jumping off point, is not really resonating in the way that it's resonating that we already have technology all around us that is automated. This is just another form of it. So there have been a lot of conversations about will UI and UX be affected by things like AI. And if you're unaware of what AI is or how it can potentially affect UX, I will explain. So let's say that there was an application or a generator out there that was able to build websites and design websites and templates just like you were. Let's say all you had to do was put in your criteria, what you wanted the website or the application to have, and within seconds, it would generate that code or that template or what have you, whatever it is that you need or whatever it is the user is needing for them in seconds. This is one of the things that AI is going to be able to do in terms of design, in terms of website design and things like that. The question then becomes, is my job as a user experience designer, as a person who works with other people to understand their problems and then to solve their problems, is my job as a designer now in jeopardy because of this AI? So as a UX designer, if I'm a UX designer and a UI designer, so is it a bad thing that I now have a tool, a randomizer, a generator, that will free up some of my brain power from some of those smaller tasks like putting together a layout. And now I can focus on who my user is and making sure that I'm actually delivering for them and that the design and the template is kind of done for me. It doesn't mean that the design is done. It doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily go with that design. But what it does mean is that now I have options more quickly for my client or for my company. I now have designs readily available at a faster pace. I don't have to sit there and spend several days to a week coming up with different templates and different designs and different ways that we can think about this. And now we can actually focus and make sure that we are solving the problems and making sure that we are carrying whatever this project is forward, and that we are forward thinking and that we are thinking about other problems that are going to come up. And this tool is just going to allow me to work faster. Is that a bad thing? Now, there will be varying opinions on yes, that is a bad thing, or no, that's not a bad thing. But what I think is that what matters is the way in which we use these tools. The crux of being a UX designer is human-centered interaction, not computer-centered interaction. When we go out and we research, the reason why we do that is because we want to actually talk to people. We want to meet people. We want to listen to them. We want to figure out what their problems are. We want to see their facial expressions. That is a human connection that a computer or a robot cannot pick up. So because of that, user experience is always going to be something that will be done and need to be done by a human. Now, again, it's not a bad thing if, I'm able to have a generator or something like that to make me work faster. Now I'm more efficient. Even as a UI designer, how much time do you spend coming up with layouts and coming up with different ways to do things and different ways to style things and different ways to get all of this information on a page? How much easier would it be if you had something actually like a randomizer or a generator kind of do that work for you, and then you can think about and focus more on the branding and getting the colors right and the design principle and making sure that that layout is something that is actually going to work with the problems that you're trying to solve. That's the way that I look at AI, and that's the way that I'm seeing it. Again, the crux of, user experience design and user interface design is human connection. It is all about human interaction. So we cannot lose that, or else we'll just become computers. So we cannot lose that. Even if you think about things like ChatGPT, which is, the platform where you're able to go in and literally ask the chat anything or ask the platform anything, and it will give you all of these random answers. You can ask it for copy. you know, even if you're a copywriter, you still need a copywriter to comb through what the AI and what the generator spits out and actually apply it in context. You still need someone to actually go in and refine what it is that the copy is saying and actually make it applicable to what it is that your copy needs to go with. You still need someone who is knowledgeable, a human who is knowledgeable and has the skill set of copywriting to be able to go in there and make sure that is something that's actually going to work for the company or what it is that the copy needs to work for. So I'm really interested, what are you guys' thoughts on AI? No matter what industry it is that you're in, you may be in another industry. What are your thoughts on AI and how it's going to potentially affect us, not affect us? So that is the way that I see AI affecting or not affecting UX UI. But I really want to hear from you guys. Even if you guys aren't in the UX field, I'm really curious to know, what are your thoughts on AI and how it could potentially affect whatever industry it is that you're in. I think these are conversations that we all are going to need to have, because AI, here's the thing, here's my biggest thing about tech, specifically AI, when we have these conversations. AI, robots, all of these automated processes that we now have that are available to us and becoming more and more available to us, they're not gonna stop becoming available to us. They're not going anywhere. They're only gonna get better, they're only gonna get smarter, and they're only gonna become more and more accessible. So what are you gonna do to make sure that you stay ahead of the curve as it pertains to your specific industry? Because AI is gonna touch all of us. We see it every day. There's something new that's automated every day. So what are you going to do? And I know that this is a very touchy subject, but again, it's not going anywhere. So we're going to have to figure out how to live with it. And if we have to live with it, as people who work in UX and work in tech, how are we going to figure out how to sustain our careers, our jobs with it? Because if you think that AI is not going to affect whatever your specific industry is, you are sadly mistaken. You are sadly mistaken. So it's just one of those things that I want us to be thinking about and having conversations about, because I think it's really, really important too, so that we all kind of know what's coming and know, you know, how to essentially work with it. That's the way that I like to think about it and talk about it. Like, let's not work against it. Let's try to figure out how to use these tools to our advantage, because they're not going anywhere. It's just the reality. They're not going anywhere. So that's kind of my little rant on AI. Let me know what questions you guys have. If you have any comments on, you know, my thinking about it, you know, if you agree, are you, you know, thinking similarly about it? Let's talk about it. We'll have more conversations like that in the future. So that is going to go ahead and wrap up today's video. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments. If you have any comments for me, please leave them in the comments. I can't wait to read them. If there are any topics related to UX or outside of UX that you would like me to cover, please leave those in the comments as well. I love to read those. I'm going to finish cooking, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.